Mia Charlotte Bennett thought she knew her father. She thought she understood the careful way he managed money, his methodical approach to family finances, and his promises about her future. What she didn't know was that while she was building her life on the foundation he'd laid, he was quietly dismantling everything her late mother had left behind for her. The discovery would come through a routine banking error, a simple notification that would unravel years of deception and reveal a betrayal so profound that it would shake her faith in everything she'd believed about family, loyalty, and love.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mia Bennett had always been proud of her independence. At 26, she worked as a marketing coordinator for a sustainable fashion startup in Portland, Oregon, sharing a modest apartment with her college roommate, Sarah Chen. Her salary wasn't much, but she'd never worried about her long-term financial security. After all, she had her trust fund, the inheritance her mother Elizabeth had established before her death from cancer when Mia was just 14. The fund wasn't accessible until Mia turned 30, but knowing it existed had given her the confidence to pursue meaningful work rather than chase high-paying jobs she didn't care about. Her father, Richard Bennett, had always been transparent about it, or so she thought. "Your mother wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of," he'd say whenever the topic came up. "She set aside enough to give you real choices in life." Richard had remarried 3 years after Elizabeth's death to a woman named Vanessa Morrison, who brought 2 children from her previous marriage, twin boys named Tyler and Brandon Morrison, now 21, and finishing their junior year at expensive private colleges. Mia had tried to build relationships with her stepbrothers, but they'd always kept their distance, treating her more like an acquaintance than family. The morning that changed everything started ordinarily enough. Mia was reviewing social media campaigns at her standing desk when her phone buzzed with a notification from Pacific Northwest Trust and Banking. She almost ignored it, probably just a routine account update, but something about the message made her pause. Account activity alert. Wire transfer authorization request pending review. Mia frowned. She didn't have any pending wire transfers. She clicked through to her banking app, but instead of finding information about her checking account, she was directed to a secure message portal she'd never seen before. The message was brief and confusing. "Dear Miss Bennett, per your recent inquiry regarding trust account TNW 487291, please review the documentation for discrepancies you identified. Our records show multiple unauthorized modifications to beneficiary designations between 2019-2023. Mia stared at the screen. She hadn't made any inquiry about her trust account. In fact, she'd never even seen the account number before. Richard had always handled all communication with the bank that managed her mother's trust. Her hands trembling slightly, she called the number listed in the message. "Pacific Northwest Trust, Forensic Accounting. This is Jennifer Walsh speaking." "Hi, I'm Mia Bennett. I received a message about trust account TNW 487291, but I think there might be some mistake. I never submitted any inquiry." There was a pause. "Miss Bennett, let me pull up your file. Yes, I see the confusion. Actually, this inquiry was initiated by our automated fraud detection system, not you directly. We've been monitoring some unusual activity on your account and flagged it for review." Mia's stomach dropped. Unusual activity? What kind of unusual activity? "I can't discuss details over the phone, but given the nature of our findings, I'd strongly recommend you come in for a face-to-face meeting. Are you available this afternoon?" The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Mia could barely concentrate on work, her mind racing with possibilities. What could be wrong with her trust fund? Richard had always been meticulous about financial matters. He was a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm,
someone who lived by the rules and dotted every I. At 2 p.m., Mia sat across from Jennifer Walsh in a sterile conference room at the bank's downtown Portland branch. Jennifer was a woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she'd seen every type of financial deception imaginable. Miss Bennett, I need to ask you some questions about your trust fund before we proceed. When was the last time you reviewed the account statements? I've never seen the statements directly. My father handles all the trust communications. He gives me updates when I ask, but since I can't access it until I'm 30, I haven't paid much attention to the details. Jennifer's expression grew more serious. And you're currently 26, correct? Yes. Miss Bennett, I need to tell you something that's going to be difficult to hear. According to our records, the beneficiary designation on your mother's trust was modified 4 times between 2019 and 2023. The most recent change, made 6 months ago, removed you as the primary beneficiary entirely.
The words hit Nia like a physical blow. That's impossible. My father would never. Who's listed as the beneficiary now? Jennifer consulted her papers. Tyler Morrison and Brandon Morrison are now listed as equal beneficiaries, with 50% each. You're listed as a contingent beneficiary for 10%, only in the event that both primary beneficiaries predecease you. Mia felt the room spinning. Tyler and Brandon, my stepbrothers? But this was my mother's money. She left it for me specifically. That's what makes this particularly concerning, Jennifer said gently. We've discovered that all 4 modifications were made using forged documentation. Someone has been systematically altering your mother's trust using fraudulent paperwork, including what appears to be a forged power of attorney and fabricated legal documents. Who would have access to do something like that? That's what our investigation is determining, but given that your father is listed as the trustee and has been the primary contact for all account communications, he would be the person with the easiest access to make these changes. Mia stared at the papers Jennifer had spread across the table. Bank statements, wire transfer records, legal documents, all showing a steady erosion of her inheritance over the past 4 years. Money that should have grown to nearly $800,000 by the time she turned 30 had been systematically transferred out, with most of it redirected to accounts belonging to Tyler and Brandon Morrison. How much is left? Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In your trust? About $47,000. The number felt surreal. Her mother had worked as a successful pediatric nurse and had been incredibly careful with money. Elizabeth Bennett had invested wisely, lived modestly, and specifically structured the trust to provide Mia with financial security. Now, almost everything was gone. Miss Bennett, I need you to understand something important. Our forensic team has been building a case around this fraud for several weeks. We have clear evidence of document forgery, unauthorized transfers, and what appears to be a systematic scheme to redirect your inheritance. But we need your cooperation to move forward with legal action. Mia nodded numbly. What do I need to do? First, we need you to file a formal complaint with our fraud division. Then, we'll need you to gather any documents you might have at home related to the trust, anything your father might have shared with you over the years. Finally, and this is crucial, we need you to not alert anyone in your family about this investigation until we've completed our evidence gathering. As Mia walked out of the bank that afternoon, her entire world felt different. The city looked the same food trucks, the same busy sidewalks, the same mountain views in the distance. But everything felt uncertain now. The financial security she'd counted on was gone, stolen by the person she'd trusted most. But more than the money, it was the betrayal that cut deepest. Richard hadn't just stolen her inheritance. He'd looked her in the eye for years, talking about her mother's wishes and her future security, all while systematically destroying both. That evening, Mia sat in her apartment staring at her phone. She'd planned to call Richard, to confront him immediately, but Jennifer's words echoed in her mind. They needed to complete their investigation first. They needed all the evidence. For the first time in her adult life, Mia Dennett felt truly alone. But beneath the shock and hurt, something else was beginning to emerge. A quiet, determined anger that would fuel everything that came next. The spark had been lit. The awakening was about to begin.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Mia spent the next 3 days in a strange state of suspended reality. She went through the motions at work, smiled at appropriate moments during conversations, and maintained her normal routines. But underneath it all, she was conducting a secret investigation into her own life. The first thing she did was search through every box, drawer, and file folder in her apartment. She was looking for any documents related to her mother's trust that Richard might have shared with her over the years. What she found was surprisingly little. A few generic letters from the bank acknowledging account updates, and one document from when she turned 21 that simply stated the trust remained on track for maturity distribution. But it was what she didn't find that proved more revealing. Mia realized she'd never seen an actual trust document, never received detailed statements, and never been included in any substantive conversations about the fund's management. For 12 years, she'd simply accepted Richard's word that everything was being handled properly. On Thursday evening, Mia made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. She called her Aunt Patricia, Elizabeth's younger sister who lived in Seattle. If anyone would have copies of her mother's original legal documents, it would be Patricia. "Mia, honey, what a lovely surprise!" Patricia's warm voice came through the phone. "I was just thinking about you. How are things in Portland?" "I'm okay, Aunt Pat. Actually, I'm calling because I need to ask you about Mom's trust fund. Do you happen to have any copies of the original paperwork?" There was a long pause. "Sweetie, is everything all right? You sound worried." Mia had prepared for this moment, crafting a story that was technically true, but wouldn't reveal the investigation. "I'm just trying to get organized before I turned 30. I realized I don't have copies of the important documents, and I thought I should probably review everything." "Of course you should. Your mother would be proud that you're being so responsible." Patricia's voice grew more serious. "I do have copies. Elizabeth gave me a full set when she first established the trust. She wanted to make sure someone outside of Richard's influence had records of her wishes." The phrase, "outside of Richard's influence," struck me as odd. "What do you mean by that?" "Oh, nothing dramatic," Patricia said quickly. "Your mother just believed in having multiple people informed about important matters. She was always very thorough that way. Listen, why don't you drive up this weekend? I'll pull everything together and we can go through it properly." Saturday morning found Mia driving north on I-5 towards Seattle, her mind racing with anticipation and dread. The 3-hour drive gave her time to think about Patricia's comment. Had her mother harbored some doubt about Richard's financial management? Elizabeth had been incredibly detail-oriented. It would be unlike her to establish such an important trust without ensuring proper oversight. Patricia lived in a cozy craftsman house in the Wallingford neighborhood, surrounded by the kind of mature gardens Elizabeth had always admired. When she opened the door, Mia was struck by how much Patricia looked like her mother. The same warm brown eyes, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. Come in, Patricia said, embracing her niece tightly. "I've got everything laid out in the dining room. Fair warning, there's quite a bit to go through." The dining room table was covered in manila folders, each labeled in Elizabeth's careful handwriting. Trust documents, original.
investment guidelines, beneficiary instructions, and several others. Mia had never seen her mother's handwriting applied to financial matters before, and something about it made the betrayal feel even more real. Your mother was incredibly specific about her wishes, Patricia began, opening the first folder. She spent months working with her attorney, Margaret Chen. That's Sarah's mom, actually, your roommate's mother. Small world, right? Mia's eyes widened. Her roommate's mother had been her mother's lawyer? This was information that could prove crucial. Patricia continued. Elizabeth wanted to ensure that if anything happened to her, you would be financially secure and able to make choices based on your values rather than financial pressure. The trust was structured very specifically. As they went through the documents, Mia discovered details that made her stomach turn. The original trust had been set up with multiple safeguards that should have made the kind of fraud Jennifer had described nearly impossible. There were supposed to be annual statements sent directly to both Mia and Patricia. There was a requirement for court approval for any major changes. Most importantly, there was a clause that stated Richard's authority as trustee would automatically expire when Mia turned 25, with management transferring to an independent financial advisor.
Aunt Pat, Mia said carefully, have you been receiving annual statements from the trust? Patricia frowned. You know, I haven't received anything in several years. I assumed they'd stopped sending them automatically when you became an adult. Why? Haven't you been getting yours? Richard told me the bank only sent statements to the trustee until the beneficiary reached 30. That's not right, Patricia said firmly. Your mother specifically requested that statements be sent to both of us every year, regardless of your age. She wanted transparency. They spent the next hour comparing the original documents to Mia's understanding of how the trust had been managed. Every discrepancy pointed to the same conclusion. Richard had been operating completely outside the bounds of Elizabeth's wishes for years. The most damning discovery came in a folder labeled Personal Letters. Inside, Mia found a handwritten note from her mother, dated just a month before Elizabeth's death. My dearest Mia, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here to guide you personally. I want you to know that everything I've done regarding your financial future has been with your best interests at heart. I've structured your trust to give you independence and choices. Patricia has copies of everything, and I've made sure the management will transfer to professionals when you turn 25. I love you more than words can express, and I believe in the strong, capable woman you're becoming. Trust your instincts always. Mom. Mia's hands shook as she read the letter. 25. The management should have transferred to professionals over a year ago, removing Richard from any decision-making authority. Patricia, Mia said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, I need to tell you something, and I need your help. She explained everything, the bank notification, Jennifer Walsh, the discovery of the fraud, and the systematic theft of her inheritance. Patricia listened in growing horror, occasionally interjecting with questions, but mostly just absorbing the magnitude of the betrayal. That son of a... Patricia caught herself, then continued more quietly. Mia, your mother suspected something like this might happen. What do you mean? Not specifically this, but Elizabeth worried about what would happen if Richard remarried. She loved him, but she also knew he could be influenced by others. That's why she built in so many safeguards. She wanted to protect you from exactly this kind of situation. Patricia stood up and walked to a small desk in the corner of the room. She returned with another folder, this one marked Emergency Contacts. Your mother gave me a list of people to contact if anything ever seemed wrong with the trust management. The first name on the list is Margaret Chen, your roommate's mother. The second is a forensic accountant named David Rodriguez, who specializes in trust fraud. Mia felt something shift inside her, a sensation she would later recognize as her mother's strength awakening within her own spirit. Elizabeth Bennett had anticipated this betrayal and had quietly put tools in place to fight it. Even from beyond the grave, her mother was still trying to protect her. There's something else, Patricia said, opening one final folder.
Your mother made a video recording explaining the trust and her wishes. She said if there were ever questions about her intentions, this would make them clear. Patricia pulled out an old camcorder and connected it to her television. After a moment, Elizabeth's face appeared on the screen, looking tired but determined. Mia recognized the background. It was their old kitchen, filmed during the final weeks of her mother's illness. "Hello, my darling girl. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here to guide you personally. I want you to know that everything I've done regarding your financial future has been with your best interests at heart. I've structured your trust to give you independence and choices. Patricia has copies of everything, and I've made sure the management will transfer to professionals when you turn 25. I love you more than words can express, and I believe in the strong, capable woman you're becoming. Trust your instincts always. Mom." By the time the recording ended, both Mia and Patricia were crying. But beneath Mia's tears was something new, a fierce determination that felt like her mother's spirit joining with her own resolve. "We're going to stop him," Mia said quietly. "We're going to get justice for what he's done, and we're going to make sure Tyler and Brandon don't benefit from stolen money." Patricia nodded firmly. "Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become, and she'd want you to fight." That evening, as Mia drove back to Portland with copies of all the original trust documents, she felt something she hadn't experienced since learning about the fraud: hope. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was Elizabeth Bennett's daughter, and she had inherited more than money from her mother. She had inherited strength, intelligence, and the fierce protective love that had created those safeguards in the first place. The awakening was complete. Now the real fight would begin. Monday morning brought Mia's first real test of courage. Armed with her mother's original documents and Patricia's support, she had scheduled meetings that would set the entire legal process in motion. But first, she had to navigate the most dangerous part of her investigation: maintaining normalcy at home while gathering evidence. Her roommate Sarah was in the kitchen making coffee when Mia returned from Seattle, and Mia realized she had an unexpected opportunity. "Sarah, can I ask you something kind of random? Your mom, Margaret Chen, she's a lawyer, right?" "Yeah, estate planning and trust law. Why do you ask?" Sarah poured a second cup of coffee and handed it to Mia. "This might sound weird, but I think she might have worked with my mom years ago. Would she remember a client named Elizabeth Bennett?" Sarah's expression shifted immediately. "Elizabeth Bennett? Mia, my mom talks about your mother all the time. She was one of Mom's favorite clients. Brilliant woman who thought through every detail. Mom was devastated when she died." Sarah paused, studying Mia's face. "Why? Is everything okay?" Mia made a split-second decision to trust her best friend. "No, everything is definitely not okay. Can you ask your mom if she has time to meet with me this week? I think someone has been messing with my mom's trust, and I need legal advice." Within 2 hours, Mia was sitting in Margaret Chen's downtown law office, a space that felt both professional and warmly personal. Margaret was a petite woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an air of quiet competence that reminded Mia of her mother. "Mia," Margaret said, settling behind her desk, "I've been wondering when this conversation would happen. Your mother made me promise to be available if you ever had questions about the trust, and frankly, I'm surprised it took this long." "What do you mean?" Margaret opened a thick file that had Elizabeth Bennett, Trust Administration, written on the tab. "Your mother was very specific about ongoing oversight. She arranged for annual reviews, required independent auditing, and insisted on multiple layers of approval for any changes. I should have been receiving copies of all trust modifications and annual statements. I haven't seen anything in over 3 years." As Mia explained what she'd discovered, Margaret's expression grew increasingly grim. She took detailed notes, asked pointed questions, and occasionally referred to documents in Elizabeth's file. "Mia, what you're describing represents multiple felonies: document forgery, fiduciary fraud, theft.
We're talking about serious criminal charges, not just civil recovery. Margaret leaned forward. But I need you to understand what you're facing. Richard isn't just your father. He's a trusted member of the financial community. He has relationships with judges, other lawyers, and business leaders. Fighting him won't be easy. What kind of resistance should I expect? Well, first, he'll likely claim the modifications were legitimate and that you're misunderstanding the situation. He might produce additional forged documents to support his version of events. He'll probably try to paint you as an entitled young woman who's upset about not getting money immediately. Margaret paused. He might also threaten to cut off all family relations if you pursue this. The weight of Margaret's words settled over Mia. She'd been so focused on the betrayal and the theft that she hadn't fully considered the broader implications. Pursuing justice would mean not just fighting Richard, but potentially losing her entire family, including Vanessa, who might genuinely not know about the fraud, and Tyler and Brandon, who might be unwitting beneficiaries. There's something else, Margaret continued. Vanessa and her sons have been living a lifestyle funded by the stolen money. Tyler and Brandon's college tuitions, their cars, their living expenses, much of that has likely come from your inheritance. They won't want to give up that financial security. Margaret pulled out another document. I also need to prepare you for Richard's likely counterattack. He has access to your personal information, your financial records, and your daily routines. He might try to discredit you by claiming you're financially irresponsible or have substance abuse issues or mental health problems. He might hire a private investigator to look for anything he can use against you. The conversation was interrupted by Margaret's secretary announcing that David Rodriguez, the forensic accountant Patricia had mentioned, had arrived for their scheduled meeting. David Rodriguez was a tall, serious man in his 40s who carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent years unraveling financial lies. He reviewed the bank documents Jennifer Walsh had provided, compared them with Elizabeth's original trust paperwork, and spent nearly an hour creating detailed timelines on Margaret's whiteboard.
This is actually a fairly sophisticated fraud, David said finally. Whoever orchestrated this understood trust law, banking regulations, and documentation requirements. They created false paper trails, forged multiple signatures, and even established fake correspondence to cover their tracks. He pointed to specific entries on the bank statements. Look at this pattern. The major transfers always happened right after significant events. Tyler's enrollment at Stanford, Brandon's summer in Europe, the down payment on Richard and Vanessa's new house. This wasn't random theft. It was systematic funding of a lifestyle. How much total? Mia asked. David consulted his calculations. Based on what should have been in the account versus what's actually there, plus the interest and growth that was lost, you've been robbed of approximately $753,000. The number was staggering, but David wasn't finished. Here's what makes this particularly egregious, he continued. Richard didn't just steal your money. He used his position as trustee to redirect funds that were specifically meant for your education, career development, and life choices. Your mother structured this trust to mature when you were 30 because she wanted you to have the wisdom to use it well. By stealing it early, Richard robbed you not just of money, but of the opportunities and security your mother intended for you to have. Margaret and David began outlining the legal strategy. They would need to file both criminal complaints and civil lawsuits. The criminal case would focus on the forgery and fiduciary fraud, while the civil case would seek to recover the stolen funds plus damages. There's one major challenge, Margaret warned. Much of the money has already been spent on things that can't be easily recovered. Tyler and Brandon's tuition payments, family vacations, home improvements, that money's gone. We'll need to look at other assets Richard might have, including his share of the house, his retirement accounts, and any other investments. What if he doesn't have enough assets to repay what he stole? Then we pursue bankruptcy proceedings and asset seizure. We can also go after anyone who knowingly benefited from the fraud. David's expression was stern. If Vanessa knew about the scheme, if Tyler and Brandon were aware the money wasn't legitimately theirs, they could all be held liable. As the meeting concluded, Margaret handed Mia a thick packet of legal documents. These are temporary restraining orders preventing Richard from making any further changes to the trust or disposing of any major assets. We'll file these tomorrow, which means by Wednesday, Richard will know that you've discovered his fraud and that legal action is underway. The reality hit Mia like a physical blow. By Wednesday, the secret investigation would be over. Richard would know that his carefully constructed deception had been uncovered, and he would likely respond with everything he had. "Margaret," said David gently, "once we file these papers, there's no going back. Richard will hire his own lawyers, probably expensive ones. This could take years to resolve completely. Are you prepared for that kind of fight?" Mia thought about her mother's video recording, about Elizabeth's careful planning, and her obvious concerns about this exact scenario. She thought about the letter where her mother had written, "Trust your instincts always." "I'm prepared," Mia said firmly. "My mother didn't create safeguards and make recordings and give documents to Patricia because she expected me to give up when things got difficult. She expected me to fight." That evening, Mia sat in her apartment reviewing everything she'd learned. The scope of the betrayal was larger than she had imagined, the legal battle would be longer and more complex than she'd hoped, and the personal cost would likely include the destruction of every family relationship she had left. But she also knew something now that she hadn't known a week ago. She wasn't alone. Margaret Chen was brilliant and determined. David Rodriguez had the expertise to unravel even sophisticated fraud. Patricia had her back completely, and most importantly, her mother's voice was still guiding her, still protecting her, still fighting for her, even from beyond the grave. The challenge had emerged in all its daunting complexity, but Mia Bennett was Elizabeth Bennett's daughter, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Wednesday would bring the first real battle. Tuesday night, she prepared for war.
Wednesday morning at 9:47 a.m., Richard Bennett's world exploded. He was reviewing quarterly reports at his desk at Morrison & Associates Accounting when his secretary, Linda, knocked on his door with an expression of barely contained panic. "Mr. Bennett, there are 2 people here from the sheriff's office. They say they need to serve you with legal documents immediately." Richard's mind raced through possibilities. A client dispute, a tax issue, maybe something related to one of his corporate accounts. But as he accepted the thick manila envelope from the deputy, he knew instinctively that this was something far worse. The first document was a temporary restraining order freezing all activity on trust account TNW 4847291. The second was a civil complaint filed by Mia Charlotte Bennett alleging fiduciary fraud, document forgery, and theft of inheritance funds. The third was a criminal referral to the district attorney's office. Richard sank into his chair as the deputies left. Mia knew everything. Meanwhile, across town, Mia was experiencing her own form of shock. Margaret had warned her that Wednesday would be difficult, but she hadn't prepared for the immediate aftermath of going public with her accusations. Her phone had been ringing constantly since 10 a.m. Richard had called 17 times, each voicemail more desperate than the last. Vanessa had called crying, demanding to know what was happening. Tyler had sent angry text messages accusing Mia of trying to destroy the family. Brandon had been more direct, calling her a greedy bitch who was making up lies for money. But the call that truly shook her came at 11:30 a.m. from her boss, Janet Morrison, who, Mia suddenly realized with horror, shared a last name with Richard's accounting firm. "Mia, I need you to come to my office immediately." The walk down the hallway felt like a death march. Janet Morrison was a fair boss and had always supported Mia's work, but as Mia knocked on her door, she couldn't shake the feeling that her professional life was about to become another casualty of Richard's betrayal. "Sit down, Mia," Janet said, her expression unreadable. "I've just received a very disturbing phone call from Richard Bennett. He says you're his stepdaughter and that you're making false accusations against him as part of some kind of breakdown." Mia's heart sank.
Richard had predicted this. He would try to discredit her by questioning her mental stability. He suggested that you might be having substance abuse issues or psychological problems that are affecting your judgment, Janet continued. He also mentioned that you've been behaving erratically at home and that the family is very concerned about you. Janet, that's not true. I can prove. Let me finish. Janet held up her hand. Richard also offered to provide character references and suggested that perhaps you need time off to deal with your personal issues. He was very convincing and very concerned. Mia felt the walls closing in. If Richard could turn her boss against her, what else might he be able to do? However, Janet continued, and her tone shifted. I've worked with you for 3 years. I know your character, your work ethic, and your integrity. So before I responded to Richard, I did some research. Janet opened her laptop and turned it toward Mia. On the screen was Richard's LinkedIn profile, which listed him as a senior partner at Morrison, the same last name as Janet's company. Morrison & Associates is my ex-husband's firm. We've been divorced for 8 years, but I still hear gossip from that world. Richard Bennett has a reputation for being, let's say, flexible with financial ethics when it serves his interests. Relief flooded through Mia. So you believe me? I believe that someone in your family has betrayed your trust, and I believe Richard's phone call was an attempt to damage your credibility before you could tell your side of the story. Janet closed the laptop. What I want to know is, what do you need from me to fight this? The conversation that followed changed everything. Janet not only offered Mia her full support, but also provided something invaluable: inside information about Richard's professional reputation. According to Janet's sources, Richard had been involved in 2 previous ethics complaints with the state accounting board, both involving questionable handling of client funds. The complaints had been themselves quietly, but they established a pattern.
There's something else, Janet said. My ex-husband mentioned that Richard's been living well above his apparent income for the past few years. Expensive cars, lavish vacations, private school tuition for his stepchildren. People in the accounting community have been wondering where the money was coming from. Armed with this new information, Mia called Margaret immediately. Within an hour, David Rodriguez was contacting the state accounting board to request Richard's complete ethics file, and Margaret was reaching out to other attorneys who might have dealt with Richard's questionable practices. But Richard wasn't passive in his response. By Thursday morning, Mia discovered just how ruthless her father could be when cornered. She arrived at work to find 3 parking tickets on her car, unusual since she'd been parking in the same legal spot for months. During lunch, she received a call from her credit card company asking about suspicious activity on her account. When she checked, someone had attempted to make large purchases that had been blocked by fraud protection. Most unsettling of all, Sarah mentions that a man had been asking their neighbors questions about Mia's lifestyle and visitors. When pressed for details, their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, said the man had claimed to be from an insurance company investigating a claim. He was asking really personal questions, Sarah reported, about whether you drink heavily, whether you bring home different men, whether you seem financially desperate. Mrs. Patterson got suspicious and told him to leave. Margaret wasn't surprised when Mia reported these incidents. Richard is trying to build a case that you're unstable, financially irresponsible, and potentially vindictive. He's also trying to make your daily life stressful enough that you'll consider dropping the lawsuit. Is this legal? She asked. Some of it exists in gray areas. Private investigators can ask questions, and Richard might claim the credit card issue was a coincidence. But the pattern is clear. He's waging psychological warfare. The real escalation came Friday evening. Mia returned home to find Vanessa waiting in the building's lobby, her eyes red from crying and her hands shaking with what appeared to be genuine distress. "Mia, please, we need to talk," Vanessa pleaded. "I don't understand what's happening. Richard says you're accusing him of stealing your money, but that doesn't make sense. We don't have extra money.
We've been struggling to pay Tyler and Brandon's tuition." For a moment, Mia felt a stab of sympathy for her stepmother. Vanessa looked genuinely confused and frightened, not like someone who knowingly participated in fraud. "Vanessa, where did you think the money for their tuition was coming from? Richard's salary wouldn't cover Stanford tuition for both boys. He said he'd been making good investments, that his accounting knowledge helped him kick winning stocks." Vanessa's voice grew smaller. "He showed me statements from his investment account." "Can I see those statements?" "That's just it. I can't find them anymore. When I tried to look for them today, Richard got very angry and said I was being paranoid because of your false accusations." As they talked, a picture emerged of Richard's deception that was even more complex than Mia had realized. He hadn't just stolen from Mia, he'd been lying to Vanessa for years about their financial situation. The woman believed they were living on Richard's investment gains when they were actually living on stolen inheritance money. "Vanessa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully. Has Richard been different over the past few years? More secretive about finances, more controlling about family decisions?" Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. "He has been more protective of financial information. He used to discuss everything with me, but lately he says I don't need to worry about money details." She looked up at Mia with growing alarm. "Oh, God, what if you're right? What if Tyler and Brandon's entire college experience is built on stolen money?" The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Vanessa slowly accepting the reality of Richard's betrayal. By the end, she was crying not just for herself, but for Mia and for the memory of Elizabeth, who had specifically tried to protect her daughter from this exact situation. "What happens now? If Richard really did this, if the money really belongs to you, then Tyler and Brandon will have to leave college. We'll lose the house. Everything will fall apart." "I don't know. I only know that building a life on stolen money was never going to work forever. The truth was always going to come out eventually." As Vanessa left that evening, Mia realized that the struggle had entered a new phase. It wasn't just about recovering her inheritance anymore. It was about unraveling years of lies that had shaped multiple lives. Richard's fraud had created a complex web of victims, and Mia was beginning to understand that seeking justice would require destroying the illusions that had sustained her entire family. The fight was no longer just hers. It had become a battle for truth itself, with casualties that would extend far beyond financial loss. But there was no turning back now. Too much had been revealed, too many lies had been exposed, and too many people needed answers. The struggle had truly begun, and Mia was learning that the hardest part wasn't fighting Richard. It was accepting that winning might require destroying everything that remained of the family she had once believed in.
3 weeks into the legal battle, Mia's world collapsed in ways she never could have anticipated. It started on a Monday morning when Margaret called with news that drained the color from Mia's face. "Mia, I need you to sit down. Richard's attorney has filed a countersuit against you for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and abuse of process. They're seeking $2.3 million in damages." The number was so absurd that Mia almost laughed. How can he sue me for $2.3 million when he stole $753,000 from me? He's claiming that your false accusations have destroyed his professional reputation and caused severe emotional trauma to his family. His lawyer, Harrison Fletcher, is one of the most expensive litigators in the state. Mia, this isn't just a defensive move. This is a calculated attempt to bankrupt you before you can pursue your case. Margaret's voice grew more serious. "There's more. Richard has filed for an emergency hearing claiming that you're mentally unstable and that the trust modifications were made with your full knowledge and consent. He's produced documentation that allegedly shows you agreed to redirect the funds to help pay for Tyler and Brandon's education." "That's impossible. I never agreed to anything like that." "I know, but the documents look convincing at first glance.
It's going to take time for David to prove their forgeries, and in the meantime, Richard is asking the court to dismiss your case entirely and award him immediate damages for your fraudulent claims. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Friday, just 4 days away. Margaret explained that if Richard succeeded in getting Mia's case dismissed, she would not only lose any chance of recovering her inheritance, but would also be liable for millions in damages she couldn't possibly pay. Margaret, I don't have money for a protracted legal battle against someone with unlimited resources. What happens if I can't afford to fight this? The silence on the other end of the phone was answer enough. Tuesday brought another devastating blow. Mia arrived at work to find a termination letter on her desk. The official reason was budget constraints and restructuring, but when she met with Janet, the truth emerged. Mia, I fought for you as hard as I could, but Richard's attorney contacted our corporate headquarters. They claimed you were using corporate resources for personal legal matters, and that your case against Richard posed a liability risk to the company. But that's not true. I've kept this completely separate from work. I know, but they threatened to file complaints with our business insurance carrier and suggested that employing you could expose the company to lawsuits. Corporate decided it wasn't worth the risk. Janet handed me a severance check. I'm sorry, this is the best I could do. Walking out of the building where she'd worked for 3 years, carrying a box of her personal belongings, Mia felt the weight of Richard's strategy. He wasn't just trying to win the legal case. He was systematically destroying her ability to fight by eliminating her income and isolating her professionally. Wednesday night, Mia sat in her apartment calculating her rapidly dwindling resources. The legal bills were mounting, her income was gone, and her savings account was nearly empty. Sarah had offered to cover more of the rent, but Mia couldn't ask her roommate to subsidize a legal battle that might last years. The breaking point came Thursday evening when Tyler and Brandon showed up at her apartment unannounced. "We need to talk," Tyler said, pushing past Mia when she opened the door. Brandon followed, both young men looking angrier than she'd ever seen them. "You're destroying our family," Brandon accused. "Mom hasn't stopped crying for 3 weeks. Dad's having chest pains from stress, and now you've gotten him fired from his job too." "What?" Mia's stomach dropped. "Richard's been fired?" "His firm decided he was too much of a liability. Apparently having criminal complaints filed against you doesn't look good for an accounting practice. So now he's unemployed. We're probably going to lose the house, and our college funds are frozen because of your lies."
"They're not lies." "Bullshit," Brandon exploded. "We've seen the documents. Dad showed us the papers you signed agreeing to help pay for our education. You knew the money was being used for our tuition, and now you're pretending you didn't just so you can get more money." Tyler pulled out his phone and showed Mia a photograph of a document that made her blood run cold. It appeared to be a letter in her handwriting, dated 2 years earlier, expressing her desire to help fund her stepbrother's education and agreeing to redirect trust funds for that purpose. "I never wrote that," Mia said quietly. "That's not my signature." "It's a perfect match," Tyler said. "The handwriting experts Dad hired confirmed it. Face it, Mia, you agreed to this, and now you're lying about it because you changed your mind." Mia stared at the document, her mind reeling. The handwriting did look remarkably similar to hers, and the signature was close enough to be convincing. How had Richard managed to forge something so sophisticated? "Even if that were real, which it's not," Mia said, finding her voice, "I would have been 24 when I supposedly wrote it. I didn't have legal authority to modify my mother's trust." "Dad says you had a co-trustee arrangement that gave you decision-making power," Brandon replied. "Stop acting like you don't know what you agreed to." As the confrontation escalated, Mia realized that Tyler and Brandon genuinely believed what they were saying. Richard had convinced them that she was the villain, that she had voluntarily helped fund their education and was now trying to destroy their family for personal gain. "Get out," Mia said finally. "Just get out." "We're not done," Tyler said as they headed for the door. "If you don't drop this lawsuit by Friday, we're going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Your friends, your coworkers, everyone in your social media contacts.
We'll tell them how you're trying to destroy a family that welcomed you and supported you for years." After they left, Mia collapsed on her couch and did something she hadn't done since the day she discovered the fraud. She began to doubt herself. What if she was wrong? What if there had been some arrangement she'd forgotten about or misunderstood? The forged document Tyler had shown her was incredibly convincing. The handwriting analysis Richard claimed to have could be legitimate. What if her memories of her mother's intentions were colored by grief and wishful thinking? For the first time since this ordeal began, Mia seriously considered giving up. She thought about accepting Richard's version of events, dropping the lawsuit, and trying to rebuild her life. She could find another job, move to a different city, start over somewhere that Richard's influence couldn't reach. The legal bills would stop accumulating, the stress would end, and maybe she could salvage some kind of relationship with her family. But then she remembered her mother's video recording, Elizabeth's careful planning, and the safeguards that were supposed to protect the trust. She thought about Patricia's shocked reaction to learning about the missing annual statements and Margaret's confirmation that the trust modifications violated every provision Elizabeth had established. Most importantly, she thought about the woman her mother had raised her to be, someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Friday morning, as Mia prepared for the emergency hearing that could end her case forever, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She would not give up. She would not accept Richard's lies or bow to his intimidation. She would fight for the truth, regardless of the personal cost. But as she walked into the courthouse, facing Richard's expensive legal team and a judge who would determine her fate in the next few hours, Mia had never felt more alone or more uncertain about whether justice was actually possible. The crisis point had arrived, and everything hung in the balance.
The emergency hearing began at 9 a.m. sharp in Judge Catherine Morales' courtroom. Mia sat beside Margaret, watching Richard's legal team arrange an impressive display of documents and exhibits on their table. Harrison Fletcher, Richard's attorney, was a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to winning. "Your Honor," Fletcher began, "this case represents a troubling example of family greed masquerading as legal justice. My client, Richard Bennett, has been falsely accused of fraud by his own stepdaughter, who now conveniently claims to have forgotten her own written agreement to support her stepbrother's education." Fletcher presented the forged document Tyler had shown Mia, along with what appeared to be a comprehensive handwriting analysis confirming her signature. He painted a picture of Mia as an unstable young woman who had initially agreed to help her family, but was now trying to renege on her commitments for purely selfish reasons. "The emotional damage to my client and his family has been severe," Fletcher continued. "Mr. Bennett has lost his job, his reputation has been destroyed, and his marriage is under tremendous strain. We ask the court to dismiss Ms. Bennett's frivolous lawsuit and award damages for the harm she has caused." When Margaret stood to respond, Mia could see the uphill battle they faced. But then something unexpected happened. "Your Honor," Margaret said, "before we address Mr. Fletcher's arguments, I'd like to present new evidence that has just come to light. Evidence that not only proves Ms. Bennett's innocence, but reveals the true scope of Mr. Bennett's deception." Margaret nodded to David Rodriguez, who wheeled in a cart loaded with banker's boxes. "Yesterday evening, Pacific Northwest Trust and Banking completed their forensic audit of the Bennett Trust account. What they discovered goes far beyond simple document forgery." David approached the bench with a thick report. "Your Honor, the bank's investigation revealed that Richard Bennett has been operating a sophisticated embezzlement scheme for over 4 years. But the forged documents he's presented in this courtroom gave us the final piece of evidence we needed to prove it." Judge Morales frowned. "Mr. Rodriguez, please explain." "The document Mr. Fletcher presented as proof of Ms. Bennett's consent contains a fatal flaw. The letterhead shows an address for Pacific Northwest Trust that didn't exist until 6 months ago when the bank moved to their new building.
The letter is allegedly dated 2 years ago, making it physically impossible for it to be authentic. A murmur went through the courtroom. Fletcher's confident expression flickered for the first time. David continued, "But that's not all. The bank's forensic team analyzed the paper fibers, ink composition, and printing characteristics of all documents Mr. Bennett submitted over the years. They found that 12 separate documents were created using the same printer, the same paper stock, and the same ink cartridge, all within the past 3 months." "Your Honor," Fletcher interjected, "this is highly technical evidence that needs proper expert review." "I'm not finished," David interrupted, "with the judge's permission. The bank also discovered something else. Mr. Bennett has been intercepting and redirecting mail intended for both Ms. Bennett and her aunt Patricia. They found evidence of mail fraud spanning 4 years, including stolen annual statements, forged correspondence, and fabricated legal notices." Margaret stepped forward with another folder. "Your Honor, we also have testimony from Richard Bennett's former colleague at Morrison & Associates, who witnessed him using company equipment to create fake legal documents. The witness, Thomas Crawford, initially stayed silent due to professional loyalty, but came forward yesterday after learning about this hearing." The revelations sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Richard, who had been sitting confidently beside his attorney, suddenly looked pale and shaken. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. "Your Honor," Margaret continued, "we've also discovered that this isn't Mr. Bennett's first offense. The State Accounting Board provided us with sealed records from 2 previous investigations into his handling of client funds. In both cases, money mysteriously disappeared and was later found to have been diverted to personal accounts controlled by Mr. Bennett."
Fletcher was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, those records are sealed and cannot be admitted." "They were unsealed yesterday," Judge Morales said quietly, "at my request, after the district attorney's office filed criminal charges against Mr. Bennett for mail fraud, wire fraud, and fiduciary breach. Mr. Fletcher, were you not aware that your client was arrested this morning?" The courtroom erupted. Richard had been arrested? Mia looked around in confusion. No one had told her about any arrest. Fletcher appeared genuinely shocked. "Your Honor, I was not informed of any arrest. When did this occur?" "At 6 a.m., according to the DA's office. Mr. Bennett was released on bail 2 hours ago." Judge Morales looked directly at Richard. "Mr. Bennett, you should inform your attorney that you are now facing federal charges in addition to the state charges we're discussing here today." The federal charges, Margaret explained to the stunned courtroom, had been filed after the FBI discovered that Richard had been using the U.S. Postal Service to intercept and redirect Mia's mail, constituting federal mail fraud. The investigation had been triggered by the bank's forensic audit, which revealed the scope of the deception. But the breakthrough that would change everything came from an unexpected source. As the hearing continued, a woman in the back of the courtroom stood up and approached the bench. "Your Honor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I believe I have information relevant to this case. My name is Dr. Emily Watson, and I'm a document examiner with the FBI Forensic Laboratory." Judge Morales looked intrigued. "Dr. Watson, please proceed." "Yesterday, I completed an analysis of the handwriting samples Mr. Fletcher presented as evidence of Ms. Bennett's consent. The analysis reveals something extraordinary. The signature was created using a technique called traced forgery, where the forger uses mechanical aids to reproduce someone else's handwriting." Dr. Watson approached the evidence table. "Under microscopic examination, we found tiny indentations in the paper that indicate the use of a pantograph, a mechanical device used to trace signatures. We also found traces of graphite dust consistent with the use of carbon paper. Mr. Bennett didn't just forge Ms. Bennett's signature, he traced it from authentic samples using specialized equipment. The evidence was devastating. Richard had not only stolen Mia's inheritance, but had also created an elaborate scheme to make it appear that she had consented to the theft. The forged documents, the fabricated correspondence, the intercepted mail, it all pointed to a level of premeditation and deception that shocked even seasoned legal professionals. Fletcher, realizing his client's position had become hopeless, requested a brief recess to consult with Richard. When they returned, Fletcher's demeanor had completely changed. "Your Honor, in light of the new evidence presented, my client wishes to withdraw his countersuit and explore the possibility of a settlement agreement." But Judge Morales wasn't finished. "Mr. Fletcher, given the evidence of criminal fraud presented today, I'm ordering an immediate freeze on all of Mr. Bennett's assets pending resolution of the criminal charges. I'm also referring this case to the state bar for investigation into any potential legal malpractice." The hearing that was supposed to end Mia's case had instead resulted in Richard's complete exposure and the beginning of serious criminal proceedings against him. As they left the courthouse, Margaret explained the significance of what had happened. "Mia, this changes everything. The federal charges carry serious prison time, and the evidence is overwhelming. Richard's going to need to cooperate with authorities if he wants any chance of a plea deal." "What does that mean for recovering the money?" "It means Richard will likely be forced to liquidate all his assets to make restitution. The house, his retirement accounts, everything. Tyler and Brandon's college funds will be frozen pending investigation, and Vanessa will need to prove that any assets in her name weren't derived from the theft." David Rodriguez joined them on the courthouse steps. The bank is also implementing new oversight procedures for all trust accounts, and they're reviewing every case Richard was involved in during his time as a trustee. This fraud was so sophisticated that it's prompted systemic changes to prevent similar schemes. As Mia processed the morning's events, she realized that the breakthrough had come not from her own efforts, but from the institutional safeguards that her mother had wisely built into the system. The bank's forensic protocols, the FBI's document analysis capabilities, and the interconnected nature of financial oversight had ultimately exposed Richard's deception. The woman who had worried about providing for her daughter's future had in fact created a system that would protect Mia even against threats Elizabeth could never have imagined. For the first time in weeks, Mia felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The truth was finally emerging, and with it, the possibility of justice.
2 weeks after Richard's arrest, Mia found herself in the surreal position of watching her father's life unravel in real time through legal proceedings, news reports, and family conversations that felt like scenes from someone else's nightmare. The transformation began with Richard's first plea hearing, where the full scope of his crimes was laid out in devastating detail. Standing before federal judge Marcus Thompson, Richard looked nothing like the confident, controlling man who had dominated Mia's family for years. His expensive suits had been replaced by a standard, court-appointed attorney's recommendation of humble attire, and his usually perfect posture had collapsed into the defeated slouch of a man facing 25 years in federal prison. "Mr. Bennett," Judge Thompson read from the federal indictment, "you are charged with wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The government alleges that between 2019 and 2024, you systematically stole $753,000 from a trust fund, forged numerous legal documents, intercepted federal mail, and operated an ongoing criminal enterprise designed to defraud your stepdaughter of her inheritance." Each charge carried its own maximum sentence, and Mia watched Richard's face grow paler as the numbers accumulated. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chen, who was, incredibly, another member of the extended Chen family that seemed to keep appearing in Mia's life, presented evidence that painted Richard not as a desperate man who made bad choices, but as a calculating criminal who had planned every aspect of his scheme. "Your Honor," explained ADA Chen, "Mr. Bennett didn't just steal money, he created an elaborate criminal infrastructure. He established fake companies to launder the stolen funds, created false identities to open accounts, and developed sophisticated document forgery capabilities that he used to create convincing legal paperwork. The evidence was staggering. Federal investigators had discovered that Richard had been operating under 3 different business names, had opened accounts in 5 different banks, and had even rented a separate office space where he conducted his forgery operations. What Mia had thought was opportunistic theft by a desperate man was actually the work of someone who had turned fraud into a full-time criminal enterprise. But the revelation that shocked Mia most came when Rebecca Chen revealed Richard's original motivation. Your Honor, according to seized documents and recorded conversations, Mr. Bennett began planning this scheme in 2018, within months of marrying Vanessa Morrison. Financial records show that he made promises to his new wife about providing her sons with elite college educations and maintaining an upper-class lifestyle that his legitimate income could never support. The prosecutor played a recorded phone conversation between Richard and an unknown accomplice, obtained through a wiretap on Richard's phone after his arrest. In the recording, Richard's voice was cold and calculating as he discussed managing the Bennett girls' expectations and ensuring that the money flows where it needs to go for family stability. Hearing her father refer to her as the Bennett girl while plotting to steal her inheritance was like receiving a physical blow. This wasn't a man who had gradually succumbed to temptation. This was someone who had never viewed her as family, only as an obstacle to the lifestyle he wanted to provide for his new wife and stepchildren. The transformation wasn't limited to Mia's understanding of Richard's character. The investigation had also revealed the extent to which other family members had been affected by his deception. Vanessa, it turned out, had been unknowingly living a completely fabricated financial reality. Federal investigators discovered that Richard had been showing her fake investment statements, forged bank documents, and fraudulent income reports for years. The woman Mia had sometimes resented for her expensive tastes and casual attitude toward money had actually been as much a victim of Richard's deception as anyone else. He told me we were wealthy, Vanessa explained to Mia during a difficult conversation in Margaret's office. He showed me statements saying his investment portfolio was worth over $1 million. He said that's how we could afford Tyler and Brandon's tuition, the house payments, all of it. I never questioned it because he was an accountant. I trusted that he understood money better than I did.
The financial devastation facing Vanessa and her sons was complete. The house would need to be sold to pay restitution to Mia. Tyler and Brandon would have to leave their expensive private colleges and transfer to state schools, assuming they could get financial aid after their family's financial fraud became public knowledge. Vanessa's own credit had been destroyed by the investigation as banks discovered that several loans had been obtained using falsified information about the family's income and assets. But perhaps the most profound transformation was happening within Tyler and Brandon themselves. The young men who had angrily confronted Mia and accused her of lying were now forced to confront the reality that their entire college experience had been funded by stolen money. Tyler, the older twin by 12 minutes, took the news with a stoicism that reminded Mia painfully of her mother. "I keep thinking about all the times Dad talked about family values and doing the right thing," he told Mia during a family meeting mediated by Margaret. "He made us write thank you letters to him every semester for paying our tuition. We thought he was sacrificing for us, but he was actually just stealing from you." Brandon's reaction was more volatile. The anger he had initially directed at Mia had transformed into rage at Richard, but also into a devastating self-doubt about his own moral character. "What does it say about me that I lived off stolen money for 3 years and never questioned where it came from?" he asked. "I bought cars, went on spring break trips, lived in expensive dorm rooms, all funded by money that belonged to you. How do I live with that?" The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of Mia's life. She found herself in the unexpected position of having to comfort the young men who had threatened and vilified her just weeks earlier.
But looking at Tyler and Brandon, she saw not the entitled stepbrothers she had resented, but two young adults whose lives had been built on lies, and who were now facing the collapse of everything they had believed about their family and themselves. "You didn't know," Mia told them. "You trusted your stepfather, just like I did, just like Vanessa did. The difference is that I happened to get a bank notification that exposed the truth. If that hadn't happened, Richard might have continued stealing for years without any of us knowing." Margaret had advised Mia that she could potentially pursue additional damages against Tyler and Brandon for unjust enrichment, essentially making them pay back the money they had received, even unknowingly. But as Mia looked at these young men whose world had been shattered, she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "I'm not going to pursue any claims against Tyler and Brandon. They were victims of Richard's deception, not willing participants in his fraud." The decision wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about breaking the cycle of destruction that Richard's crimes had set in motion. Mia realized that pursuing every possible legal remedy would mean years more of litigation, family conflict, and mutual destruction. Her mother's trust fund had meant to give her choices and security, not to fund an endless legal war that would consume everyone involved. The transformation extended to Mia's own priorities and goals. The experience of fighting for justice had awakened something in her that she hadn't known existed, a passion for financial justice and fraud prevention. Margaret suggested that Mia consider law school with a focus on trust and estate law. "You have a unique perspective on financial fraud," Margaret told her. "You understand both the legal complexities and the human cost of these crimes. That combination could be an incredibly effective advocate for other victims." The idea appealed to Mia more than she had expected. The marketing career she had been building felt insignificant compared to the possibility of helping other families avoid the devastation that Richard's fraud had caused. As Richard's sentencing hearing approached, Mia found herself thinking less about punishment and more about prevention. The man who stole her inheritance and betrayed her trust would face justice, but the more important question was how to ensure that other families wouldn't experience the same betrayal. The transformation was complete. Mia Bennett was no longer just a victim seeking restitution. She had become someone with a mission to protect others and a clear vision of how to use her painful experience to create positive change in the world.
6 months after Richard's sentencing to 15 years in federal prison, Mia stood in the same Portland courthouse where her legal nightmare had begun, but this time as a law student intern working on her first trust fraud case. The transformation was complete, from victim to advocate, from betrayed daughter to protector of other families facing similar deceptions. The case she was working on involved an elderly widow whose son had been systematically draining her trust fund to support a gambling addiction. As Mia reviewed the evidence with her supervising attorney, she recognized the same patterns of deception that Richard had used: forged documents, intercepted mail, and elaborate lies designed to maintain the victim's trust while stealing their security. "This is exactly how my stepfather operated," Mia explained to her supervisor, Professor Amanda Sterling from Lewis and Clark Law School. "The victim trusts the perpetrator completely, which makes them vulnerable to sophisticated deception that would never fool a stranger." Professor Sterling nodded approvingly. "Your personal experience gives you insights that most attorneys never develop. You understand the emotional manipulation that makes financial fraud possible." The legal victory against Richard had been complete, but complex. The federal court had ordered him to pay $753,000 in restitution, plus an additional $200,000 in punitive damages and legal fees. However, most of his assets had already been liquidated during the investigation. The house was sold, generating $180,000 toward restitution after paying off the mortgage. Richard's retirement accounts, investment portfolios, and other assets contributed another $220,000. The remaining balance came from an unexpected source:
Pacific Northwest Trust and Banking's insurance policy covering trustee fraud. After their internal investigation revealed security vulnerabilities that had made Richard's scheme possible, the bank agreed to a settlement that fully compensated Mia for her losses. More importantly, they implemented the new oversight protocols that David Rodriguez had recommended, creating safeguards that would protect future trust beneficiaries. But the financial recovery was only part of Mia's victory. The true measure of success was in the systemic changes that resulted from her case. The FBI had used Richard's case as a model for developing new fraud detection protocols that were now being implemented nationwide. Banking regulators had created mandatory reporting requirements for trust account modifications. The American Bar Association had updated their ethical guidelines for estate attorneys based on lessons learned from Richard's deception. Most significantly, Mia had worked with Margaret Chen to establish the Elizabeth Bennett Trust Protection Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating families about trust fraud prevention and providing legal assistance to victims of financial abuse. "Your mother would be incredibly proud," Margaret told Mia as they reviewed applications for the foundation's first round of grants. "She created a trust to protect you, and you've used that experience to protect countless other families." The foundation's first major initiative was a partnership with law schools across the country to create trust fraud clinics where law students could gain experience while providing free legal services to fraud victims. The pilot program, launched at Lewis and Clark, had already helped 12 families recover stolen inheritances and prosecute financial predators. Mia's relationships with her family had evolved in ways she never could have anticipated. Vanessa had moved back to Seattle to live with her sister, taking a job as a financial counselor, helping families recover from bankruptcy and fraud. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Vanessa's experience as Richard's victim had qualified her to help others facing similar financial devastation. "I spent years living a lie without knowing it," Vanessa told Mia during one of their regular phone calls. "Now I help other people recognize the warning signs I missed. It's like my stupidity has become my qualification."
Tyler had transferred to University of Washington and changed his major from business to social work, driven by a desire to help families in crisis. Brandon had taken a more direct approach to making amends. He'd joined the military and was using his signing bonus to make voluntary payments toward Mia's legal fees, even though he wasn't legally required to do so. "I know I can't undo the fact that I benefited from stolen money," Brandon had written in a letter to Mia, "but I can spend the rest of my life trying to balance the scales somehow." The most unexpected relationship development involved Richard himself. 3 months into his sentence, he had begun writing letters to Mia, not asking for forgiveness or seeking to minimize his crimes, but providing detailed information about other fraud schemes he had witnessed or suspected during his accounting career. "I destroyed my family and betrayed your mother's trust," Richard wrote in his first letter. "I can't undo that, but I can help you prevent other families from experiencing what I put you through. I know how these schemes work because I perfected them. Maybe that knowledge can serve some useful purpose." Richard's information had already led to 3 additional fraud investigations, including a case involving a law firm that had been systematically stealing from client trust accounts for over a decade. His cooperation with federal investigators had become so valuable that the prosecutor's office was using him as a consultant on complex financial fraud cases. The letters were difficult for Mia to read, not because Richard sought sympathy, but because they revealed a level of self-awareness that made his original betrayal even more incomprehensible. He understood exactly what he had done and why it was wrong, which meant his decision to steal from her had been made with full knowledge of the harm it would cause. "I think about your mother every day," Richard wrote in his most recent letter. "Not because I miss her, but because I'm ashamed of how completely I failed to honor the trust she placed in me. Elizabeth believed I would protect you, and instead, I became the person she was trying to protect you from.
Mia had shown the letters to her therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who helped her understand that Richard's newfound honesty didn't require forgiveness, but it did offer something valuable: insight into the mindset that makes such betrayals possible. Understanding doesn't mean excusing, Dr. Kim explained, but Richard's letters help you see the warning signs that might protect other families. That knowledge is part of your mother's legacy, too. As Mia's second year of law school approached, she reflected on how completely her life had changed since that random bank notification 18 months earlier. The marketing career she had been building felt like someone else's life. The financial security she had taken for granted had been replaced by something more valuable, a sense of purpose that grew stronger with each family she helped. The most profound change was in her relationship with her mother's memory. Elizabeth's trust fund had meant to provide financial security, but its theft and recovery had given Mia something more important: a calling. Every time she helped another fraud victim, every time she educated a family about trust protection, every time she trained a new law student to recognize financial abuse, she was fulfilling her mother's true intention: using Elizabeth's love and protection to create security and choices for others. The final piece of Mia's transformation came during a speaking engagement at a national estate planning conference where she addressed an audience of attorneys, financial advisors, and trust officers about preventing family fraud. My stepfather stole my inheritance, but he couldn't steal my mother's legacy. Elizabeth Bennett raised me to fight for what is right and to protect people who can't protect themselves. That's exactly what I'm doing, just not in the way either of us expected. The applause was long and heartfelt, but more important were the conversations that followed. Attorney after attorney approached Mia with stories of clients who had experienced similar betrayals and questions about how to build better safeguards into their practice. By the end of the conference, Mia had collected enough material for a comprehensive guide to trust fraud prevention that would become required reading in estate planning courses nationwide. Standing outside the conference center that evening, Mia called Patricia to share the day's successes. Her aunt had become not just a supporter, but a co-founder of the foundation, using her own inheritance from Elizabeth to fund their expansion into national advocacy. Your mother always said that our greatest challenges become our greatest strengths. She would be amazed to see how you've turned Richard's betrayal into protection for so many other families. As Mia walked through downtown Portland that night, she thought about the bank notification that had changed everything, the courthouse battles that had tested her resolve, and the family relationships that had been destroyed and rebuilt in unexpected ways. Richard Bennett had stolen her inheritance, but in doing so, he had revealed her true inheritance: the strength, integrity, and protective love that Elizabeth had instilled in her daughter. That legacy was worth far more than any trust fund. And, unlike money, it was something that could never be stolen. The trust fund betrayal was over. The legacy of protection and justice it had created would continue for generations.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.